You're complaining about your hard life and you're so privileged. It's just so weird. Well, they insist that you go along with their nonsense and their insanity and their fragility.
No.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
They're ridiculous.
She is a malignant narcissist who cannot get enough of herself while she simultaneously plays the victim.
I'm searching for something to like about her, and it's so hard.
Also a fox. If you haven't noticed, my husband's very, very handsome. His heart is even more beautiful.
Oh, but his heart is even more beautiful. This is so forced.
I know that I'm a great friend, and I know the kind of mom I am.
Her mannerisms weren't like that. This is all fake.
And it's unacceptable. And it's just got to stop.
The beginning of that clip where she's like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
It's so inauthentic.
H.
Why do you call him H? It's so dumb sounding.
She's trying to sell herself as this wholesome mother who's baking cookies and making tea, but we all know that that's not the truth.
I knew her a bit. She was nothing like that. She didn't speak like that.
The gloves are off, and the verdict is in. When one of America's most fearless comedians decides to take aim at Hollywood royalty, the results are nothing short of explosive.
Pretending like she's crying, like we zoomed in just to see. There isn't a tear in sight. Look at this.
Where she says one tap left eye and she can make herself cry on demand.
It's crazy. They're like, Meghan, one tear, left eye, go. Give me 3 seconds.
What?
Bill Maher just delivered what many are calling the most devastating takedown of Meghan Markle's career, and the internet is absolutely on fire. What started as a simple podcast appearance has snowballed into a full-scale reputation meltdown that has left critics questioning everything they thought they knew about the Duchess of Sussex.
So many of them call you M and Harry H.
Yes.
How did that start?
Probably at the beginning of us dating.
This is fake. She knows exactly when that happened. The eye search she's got going on there, that's forced and faked, as is the facial expression.
The fallout has been swift and merciless. Social media platforms are buzzing with reactions. Think pieces are flooding news outlets, and even the most reserved commentators are weighing in with opinions that would make your grandmother blush. This isn't just another celebrity controversy. This is a masterclass in how quickly public perception can shift when authenticity comes under the microscope.
I knew her a bit. She was nothing like that. She didn't speak like that. Her mannerisms weren't like that. This is all fake. LA girl. Yeah. Now she's like this, oh, I'm soft, I'm mummy, I'm this.
The woman who once commanded headlines with her fairy tale romance now finds herself at the center of a very different kind of story, one where the ending doesn't look quite so happy. Bill Maher didn't mince words when he addressed Meghan Markle's latest podcast appearance, and his critique cut straight to the bone. With the precision of a surgeon and the delivery of a seasoned comedian, Maher zeroed in on what he saw as the most glaring contradiction of all: someone complaining about hardship while living in unprecedented luxury.
I really think when she says she's overwhelmed, it just makes any other mother think, I'm sorry, you haven't lived a day in my life, hon.
From 6:30 in the morning on drop-off mornings for me, I'm not home till 9.
Boring.
Sounds like a normal day to me, Meghan. Waking up at 6:30 is not that intense. The rest of the world is waking up at that time.
You're complaining about your hard life, and you're so privileged. It's just so weird, Maher declared, his voice dripping with the kind of incredulity that resonates with millions of ordinary Americans. This wasn't just a casual observation. It was a direct challenge to the entire narrative that Markle has been carefully crafting since her exit from royal duties. The comedian's frustration was palpable as he continued his assault on what he perceived as manufactured victimhood. Maher's decades in entertainment have given him a front-row seat to Hollywood's most elaborate performances, and his trained eye clearly wasn't buying what Markle was selling. The disconnect between her claimed struggles and her actual circumstances was so stark that even someone known for controversial takes seemed genuinely bewildered by the audacity.
I've got to pack school lunches, then I might drive them to school, then I might manage my meetings after that.
Brush my teeth, get both of them up, I get them dressed, get them downstairs, make breakfast.
Talking about it as if she was about to sink underwater from the pressure, I just don't believe it. It's a normal daily routine.
But Maher didn't stop there. He escalated his criticism by addressing what he saw as a broader pattern of manipulation and emotional blackmail. They like to insist that you go along with their nonsense and their insanity and their fragility, he observed, touching on something that clearly clearly struck a nerve with audiences who felt they were being asked to accept a version of reality that didn't match their own observations. This wasn't just about one podcast appearance. It was about a systematic approach to public relations that demanded unwavering support regardless of how disconnected from reality the claims became. Maher's refusal to play along represented a turning point, a moment when even progressive Hollywood started pushing back against what they saw as emotional manipulation dressed up as vulnerability.
My castle's too small. The queen was mean to me. They won't let me call myself Her Royal Highness anymore.
She's trying to sell herself as this wholesome mother who's baking cookies and making tea, but we all know that that's not the truth.
The comedian's takedown resonated so powerfully because it articulated what many people had been thinking but hadn't been able to express. In an era where questioning certain narratives can lead to social media pylons and career consequences, Maher's willingness to call out what he saw as obvious contradictions felt refreshing to audiences hungry for honest discourse. This critique would prove to be just the beginning of a much larger unraveling, one that would expose deeper questions about authenticity in the age of carefully curated public personas. The podcast was marketed as an intimate, unguarded moment, Meghan Markle appearing raw and without makeup in what was supposed to be an authentic glimpse behind the carefully constructed royal facade.
When you were saying, like, do you want to just do like cozies and no makeup? I like the idea of like, okay, great, let's let them see us.
Stop it with this. We're just sitting in our living room, in our cozies, barefoot, spilling our secret.
The promotional materials promised viewers would see the real woman behind the title, unfiltered and genuine. What they got instead was something that felt anything but spontaneous. Eagle-eyed viewers immediately began dissecting every frame of the appearance, and what they found didn't match the narrative being sold. Despite claims of being makeup-free, Markle appeared suspiciously polished for someone supposedly caught off guard. Her hair was perfectly blown out, her skin looked flawless, and every angle seemed calculated for maximum impact.
Everything they do seems so manipulative, calculated, PR motivated, money motivated.
Critics quickly pointed out the obvious contradiction. First of all, she had the hair blown out. It was perfect. I do not believe that she was makeup-free there, one observer noted, highlighting the disconnect between the marketed authenticity and the visual reality. The no makeup claim became even more suspect when viewers realized she simply wasn't wearing eye makeup, a far cry from the completely natural look that had been promised. This careful orchestration of supposedly spontaneous moments revealed something much more troubling about Markle's approach to public appearances. Every element seemed designed to convey a specific message, from the casual setting to the vulnerable tone. The problem was that the execution felt so calculated that it achieved the opposite of its intended effect, making viewers more skeptical rather than more trusting.
Clearly went over to get herself a prince to give her access to this lifestyle that she would have never had access to.
The blown-out hair became a symbol of the broader authenticity problem. In an age where social media has made everyone an expert at spotting filtered photos and staged content, audiences have developed a keen eye for manufactured moments. The disconnect between the promised rawness and the polished reality struck many as emblematic of a deeper pattern of deception. But the makeup controversy was just the tip of the iceberg. What really captured attention was what happened when the camera started rolling and Markle began sharing her supposedly heartfelt emotions. The stage was set for what promised to be genuine vulnerability, but what unfolded instead would raise even more serious questions about performance versus authenticity.
She doesn't use it for public gain or commercial gain, but in private she uses it? How cringe and tacky is that?
When Meghan Markle appeared to become emotional during the podcast, viewers expected to witness genuine vulnerability. Instead, what they saw launched 1,000 memes and sparked serious questions about the authenticity of her emotional displays. The absence of actual tears during moments of supposed overwhelming emotion didn't go unnoticed by audiences who were watching with increasingly skeptical eyes. Pretending that she's crying, like we zoomed in just to see there isn't a tear in sight, one critic observed, articulating what many viewers had noticed but hadn't been able to pinpoint. The performance felt rehearsed, almost clinical in its execution.
Denied being interested in the royal family, which she totally was. I know someone who knows the ex-husband who said she had a vision board with Prince Harry on it.
For someone who had trained as an actress, the ability to summon emotion on command wasn't exactly surprising, but it was deeply unsettling in a context where genuine vulnerability was supposedly being shared. The crocodile tears phenomenon became a viral talking point, with social media users creating side-by-side comparisons and slow-motion replays that highlighted the absence of actual moisture despite the dramatic facial expressions. The technical precision of the emotional display, complete with perfectly timed voice breaks and strategic pauses, felt more like a workshop exercise than a spontaneous reaction to painful memories. Body language experts weighed in with with their own analysis, pointing out the disconnect between Markle's facial expressions and the emotional state she was attempting to convey. The eye search she's got going on there, that's forced and faked, as is the facial expression, one expert noted, breaking down the mechanics of what appeared to be a carefully choreographed performance. The actress' background became impossible to ignore in this context. Stories emerged of her ability to produce tears on command during her acting career, with one source claiming she could make herself cry on demand with remarkable precision. "You're like Meghan, 1 tear left eye, go give me 3, the source revealed, painting a picture of someone who had turned emotional manipulation into a technical skill. This revelation transformed the entire context of her podcast appearance. What was supposed to be a moment of genuine human connection suddenly felt like a masterclass in manipulation, complete with all the technical skills she had acquired during her years in Hollywood. The seamless transition from composed to emotional and back again began to look less like natural human response and more like professional performance art. The implications were staggering. If the tears were manufactured, what else about her public persona was carefully constructed? This question would lead audiences down a much darker path of discovery, one that would reveal an even more troubling pattern of calculated image management. Perhaps nothing has generated more skepticism about Meghan Markle's authenticity than the dramatic personality transformation that seemed to occur around the time of her relationship with Prince Harry. People who knew her before her royal romance paint a picture of someone completely different from the soft-spoken, vulnerable woman the public sees today. "I knew her a bit, she was nothing like that. She didn't speak like that, her mannerisms weren't like that. This is all fake," one acquaintance from her pre-royal days revealed, describing a transformation so complete it seemed to involve a fundamental personality overhaul. The woman they remembered was described as a real hard-nosed LA girl, someone who navigated Hollywood's shark-infested waters with calculation and ambition. The contrast couldn't be more stark. The pre-royal Meghan was reportedly direct, ambitious, and unafraid to pursue what she wanted with single-minded determination. She understood the entertainment industry's brutal realities and played the game accordingly. This version of Meghan bore little resemblance to the hesitant, overwhelmed mother figure who now graced podcast appearances with carefully modulated vulnerability. The transformation seemed to coincide perfectly with her entry into Harry's world, leading many to question whether the current persona was authentic or simply another role in her acting portfolio. "She was a real hard-nosed LA girl. Now she's like, oh, I'm soft, I'm mommy," one observer noted, highlighting the dramatic shift in public presentation. Critics began to see this transformation as evidence of something more calculated than personal growth. The timing was too convenient, the change too complete, and the execution too polished to feel entirely natural. It suggested a level of strategic thinking about public image that went far beyond normal celebrity management. The implications of this manufactured transformation extended beyond simple criticism of inauthenticity. It raised questions about manipulation and the lengths someone might go to in order to secure a particular outcome. If the soft, vulnerable persona was indeed constructed specifically to appeal to Harry and the public, what did that say about the genuine intentions behind the relationship? But the personality transformation was just one piece of a larger puzzle. The content of what Markle was actually saying during these vulnerable moments would prove to be even more problematic, revealing a disconnect from reality so profound that it would alienate the very audiences she was trying to reach. When Meghan Markle began detailing her daily struggles during the podcast appearance, she unknowingly provided critics with ammunition that would prove devastating to her carefully constructed image. Her description of being overwhelmed by routine parenting tasks struck many listeners as profoundly tone-deaf, especially coming from someone with access to resources that most parents could only dream of. The specifics of her complaints painted a picture that many found impossible to relate to. Markle described her grueling routine. "From 6:30 in the morning on drop-off mornings for me, I'm not home till 9. To millions of working parents who consider 6:30 a.m. a luxury and whose days extend far beyond 9 p.m. without the benefit of household staff, this schedule sounded more like a part-time job than an overwhelming burden. Meghan waking up at 6:30 is not that intense. The rest of the world is waking up at that time," one critic observed, articulating the disconnect that many parents felt when hearing her complaints. The idea that school drop-offs and basic childcare represented some kind of unique hardship seemed to reveal how removed she had become from ordinary people's realities. The detailed breakdown of her daily routine only made things worse. "I've got to pack school lunches, then I might drive them to school, then I might manage my meetings after that, brush my teeth, get both of them up, I get them dressed, get them downstairs, make breakfast," she recounted, describing activities that constitute a normal Tuesday morning for countless parents worldwide. What made these complaints particularly grating was the context in which they were delivered. This wasn't someone working multiple jobs to make ends meet or juggling childcare childcare without support systems. This was someone with access to nannies, housekeepers, drivers, and assistants, complaining about tasks that millions of people handle daily without any help whatsoever. I really think when she says she's overwhelmed, it just makes any other mother think, "I'm sorry, you haven't lived a day in my life, hun," one parent commented, expressing the frustration that many felt when confronted with such privileged complaints. The disconnect was so complete that it seemed to exist in an entirely different universe from most people's experiences. The privilege problem went deeper than just scheduling complaints. It revealed a fundamental inability to understand how her words would be received by people living in actual challenging circumstances. This tone deafness would become a recurring theme, one that would fuel an even more damaging narrative about her constant need to position herself as a victim despite overwhelming advantages. The pattern became impossible to ignore once critics started connecting the dots. Meghan Markle's public appearances consistently featured one central theme, her victimhood. Despite living a life of extraordinary privilege, she seemed unable to discuss any aspect of her existence without framing it in terms of struggle, persecution, or overwhelming challenge. "I just think she's crying for sympathy, playing the victim," one commentator observed, identifying what many saw as a calculated strategy to garner public support. The victim narrative appeared to be deployed regardless of circumstances, creating a disconnect so profound that it began to work against her rather than generating the sympathy she seemed to crave. The accusations went beyond simple criticism of tone deafness. Some commentators used remarkably strong language to describe what they saw as a pathological pattern. "She is a malignant narcissist who cannot get enough of herself while she simultaneously plays the victim," one critic declared, suggesting that the victim complex served a dual purpose of generating attention while deflecting criticism. The examples of supposed victimhood often seemed to critics like complaints about incredibly privileged problems. "My castle's too small. The queen is mean to me. They won't let me call myself Her Royal Highness anymore." One satirical summary captured the essence of complaints that many found difficult to take seriously given the circumstances. What made the victim narrative particularly problematic was its persistence across different contexts and time periods. Whether discussing her acting career, her royal experience, or her current life in California, the framing remained consistently focused on hardship and persecution. This pattern suggested to critics that victimhood wasn't just a response to difficult circumstances, it was a fundamental part of her identity and strategic approach to public relations. The victim complex also served as a shield against criticism. By consistently positioning herself as the wronged party, any negative feedback could be reframed as further evidence of persecution rather than legitimate concerns about behavior or authenticity. This circular logic created a situation where criticism became impossible without appearing to attack someone who was already suffering. But the victim narrative was just one component of a broader strategy that critics began to identify. The desperate attempt to appear relatable and down-to-earth would prove to be equally problematic, revealing calculation where authenticity was supposed to exist. Nothing exposed the calculated nature of Meghan Markle's public image, quite like her attempts to appear relatable to ordinary people. Critics began to identify a pattern of almost desperate efforts to convince the public that she was just like us, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The harder she tried to project normalcy, the more artificial the entire endeavor appeared. "The one thing she is dying to sell to us is relatability. The one thing she is dying for more than anything is for us to love her," one observer noted, identifying what seemed to be the driving force behind many of her public appearances. The desire for public affection appeared to override genuine connection, creating performances rather than authentic moments. The podcast appearance became a case study in manufactured relatability. From the cozy setting to the no makeup claims, every element seemed designed to suggest intimacy and normalcy. When you were saying like, "Do you want to just do like cozies and no makeup?" I like the idea of like, "Okay, great, let's let them see us," Markle had said. But the calculated nature of even these supposedly spontaneous suggestions struck many as evidence of careful image management. Critics found the trying too hard vibe particularly off-putting. "Stop it with this. We're just sitting in our living room in our cozies barefoot spilling our secrets," one commentator complained, expressing frustration with what felt like a costume party version of authenticity. The more elaborate the setup became, the less genuine it appeared to audiences who were increasingly sophisticated about identifying manufactured content. The relatability efforts often backfired spectacularly, highlighting the very privileges they were meant to downplay. Attempts to seem ordinary only emphasized how extraordinary her circumstances actually were, creating a disconnect that made genuine connection impossible. The carefully staged moments meant to make her seem approachable often had the opposite effect, appearing calculated and manipulative. This intense focus on relatability suggested something deeper and more troubling about her motivations. critics began to see the entire enterprise as evidence of cold calculation rather than genuine desire for connection. Every move seemed designed to serve a strategic purpose rather than emerging from authentic human impulse. The desperation for public approval would soon manifest in even more problematic ways, as the financial motivations behind her various ventures became impossible to ignore. Behind the carefully crafted image of vulnerability and authenticity, critics began to identify what they saw as a much more calculating reality. Everything appeared to be about money and status. The suggestion that financial gain and social climbing were primary motivators cast Markle's entire public persona in a different light, transforming supposed vulnerability into strategic positioning. Everything they do seems so manipulative, calculated, PR motivated, money motivated, one commentator observed, articulating suspicions that had been building for years. The pattern of behavior seemed less about genuine connection and more about strategic brand building, with each public appearance serving specific financial and reputational objectives. The accusations became even more direct when it came to her royal marriage. She's not important, she married for money. It's very clear she bagged the elephant. She was thrilled she became a quote princess, one critic declared, suggesting that the entire relationship was built on strategic considerations rather than romantic love. The idea that she had clearly went over to get herself a prince to give her access to this lifestyle that she would have never had access to painted the fairy tale romance in decidedly unromantic terms. These allegations weren't just casual speculation. Reports emerged suggesting that her interest in royalty predated her relationship with Harry by years. "I know someone who knows the ex-husband, who said she had a vision board with Prince Harry on it," one source claimed, describing what appeared to be long-term strategic planning rather than coincidental romance. The financial motivation became even more apparent when critics examined the contradiction between her stated desires for privacy and her continuous pursuit of publicity. "These people were so mean to us. We don't want all this attention. And then let me write a book about how much we don't want attention," one observer noted, highlighting the logical inconsistency that suggested money was the real driving force. The pattern extended beyond just the royal connection. Every venture, from podcasts to book deals to speaking engagements, seemed designed to maximize financial return while maintaining the facade of public service or personal sharing. The business model appeared to be built on monetizing personal drama and perceived persecution. But the money trail was just one aspect of a deeper obsession that would prove even more revealing about Markle's true priorities and motivations. Perhaps nothing revealed Meghan Markle's true priorities quite like her relationship with royal titles and status symbols. Despite officially stepping back from royal duties and publicly complaining about the constraints of royal life, her behavior suggested an almost pathological attachment to the very status she claimed to have rejected. The most damning evidence came in the form of documents where she was caught using her full royal title in private settings. Zoom in here, and it says, "With the compliments of Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex," one critic noted, highlighting an instance where Markle had used the formal title that she was supposedly not meant to use for commercial or personal gain. What made this particularly problematic was the context. She doesn't use it for public gain or commercial gain, but in private she uses it. How cringe and tacky is that? The private use of royal titles struck many as even more revealing than public usage, suggesting a deep-seated need to identify with royal status even when no one was watching. The title usage became symbolic of a broader pattern that critics identified as fundamental to her character. Now to top it all off, she's literally using HRH in private, which is just even weirder, one observer noted. The private clinging to royal designation suggested that the titles weren't just useful tools for public positioning, they had become part of her core identity. This behavior provided what many saw as definitive proof of her real motivations. "That is just like all the confirmation that I need that this woman is just obsessed with being a royal. That is all this was all about," one critic declared. The evidence suggested that achieving and maintaining royal connection had always been the ultimate objective, with everything else being secondary considerations. The title obsession also revealed the hollowness of her complaints about royal life. If the royal system was as constraining and harmful as she claimed, why maintain such desperate attachment to its symbols and status markers? The contradiction suggested that her problems weren't with royalty itself, but with the responsibilities and scrutiny that came with the privileges. The pattern extended beyond just official titles to encompass her entire approach to status and recognition. Every aspect of her public presentation seemed designed to maintain connection to royal prestige while avoiding royal accountability. This calculated approach to status management would prove to have serious consequences for her public reputation. The ultimate test of Meghan Markle's carefully constructed image came when American public opinion began to crystallize around her various controversies. Despite expectations that Americans might be more sympathetic to her narrative of royal personality persecution, the response proved to be surprisingly harsh and decisive. What do Americans really think of Harry and Meghan? "We despise them," one commentator declared, articulating a sentiment that appeared to be shared by significant portions of the American public. The rejection was particularly stinging because it came from the very audience that was supposed to provide refuge from British criticism. The American response seemed to be driven by the same factors that had alienated British audiences: perceived inauthenticity, privilege complaints, and obvious calculation. American audiences, with their own complex relationship to authority and celebrity, proved to be just as skeptical of manufactured vulnerability as their British counterparts. The harsh American verdict represented a complete failure of Markle's strategic positioning. The move to California was supposed to provide a more sympathetic environment where her narrative of royal persecution might find more receptive audiences. Instead, it exposed her to a different kind of scrutiny, one that was equally unforgiving but based on different cultural values. American critics seemed particularly offended by what they saw as attempts to manipulate public opinion through emotional performance. The culture that had produced generations of entertainment industry professionals proved surprisingly resistant to what it recognized as obvious artifice. The very skills that might have served her in Hollywood became liabilities when deployed in supposedly authentic contexts. The broader implications were staggering. If American audiences, traditionally more sympathetic to underdog narratives and skeptical of inherited authority, were rejecting her story, it suggested that the problems with her public image went far deeper than cultural differences or media bias. The American rejection also highlighted the international nature of her reputation crisis. This wasn't just a British tabloid phenomenon or a result of cultural misunderstanding. The skepticism had become global, suggesting fundamental problems with authenticity and credibility that transcended national boundaries. The accumulation of criticism, contradictions, and calculated missteps has created what many observers see as an irreversible reputation crisis for Meghan Markle. The pattern of behavior that critics have identified, from manufactured authenticity to privilege complaints to strategic victimhood, has crystallized into a public image that may be impossible to rehabilitate. The podcast appearance that triggered Bill Maher's devastating critique represents more than just another celebrity controversy. It serves as a case study in how carefully constructed public personas can collapse when subjected to sustained scrutiny. Every element that was supposed to generate sympathy and connection instead produced skepticism and rejection. The broader implications extend far beyond one individual's reputation crisis. In an era of social media sophistication and instant global communication, audiences have become increasingly adept at identifying manufactured content and strategic positioning. The tools that once allowed celebrities to carefully control their public images have become double-edged swords that can expose calculation as easily as they can promote it. The Meghan Markle phenomenon reveals the dangers of over-engineering public perception in an age when authenticity has become the ultimate currency. The harder someone tries to control their narrative, the more obvious their manipulation becomes to audiences who have been trained by decades of media consumption to spot artificial content. The financial and reputational consequences of this reputation collapse are likely to be severe and long-lasting. Brand partnerships, media deals, and public speaking opportunities all depend on public goodwill and credibility, commodities that appear to have been severely damaged by the pattern of behavior that critics have documented. Perhaps most significantly, the Markle case demonstrates how quickly public sentiment can shift when the gap between image and reality becomes too obvious to ignore. The fairy tale narrative that once captivated global audiences has been replaced by a cautionary tale about the dangers of strategic authenticity and manufactured vulnerability. The question now isn't whether Meghan Markle can repair her public image, but whether the damage represents a fundamental shift in how audiences evaluate celebrity authenticity. The standards for genuine connection may have been permanently raised by this very public demonstration of how calculation can masquerade as vulnerability. The final verdict appears to be in: when performance meets reality in the court of public opinion, authenticity wins every time. For someone whose entire public persona appears to have been built on strategic positioning rather than genuine connection, this represents not just a public relations crisis, but a fundamental reckoning with the consequences of choosing calculation over authenticity. The applause, as Bill Maher and countless critics have noted, has largely faded. What remains is a cautionary tale about the ultimate price of manufactured authenticity in an age when genuine connection has become the rarest and most valuable commodity of all.